Hey everybody, this is my air dry clay lesson focusing on texture. So we're going to get some clay squares and we're going to cut them in half. So you will get one half and your shoulder partner will get the other half. The ones at the top have been painted and Mod Podged. The ones at the bottom, this piece is a little broken, but these are dry. So you can look at the difference between size. The one that is wet clay is large and the one that is dry is smaller. You also get a piece of molding clay for you to build your add-ons at the end. This dry clay is very fragile, so be extra careful with it. For this Crayola air dry clay lesson, I'm going to use some liquid watercolors. I have the Saks washable brand, and the colors that I'm going to let my students use are going to depend on what element they decide to make their designs with. For this one, for fire, I had red, orange, and yellow. Then we're going to Mod Podge it and make it all glossy and shiny. So let's get into it. Right now, I'm going to be showing you some examples of how to attach things, and we're going to be using Play-Doh for this beginning lesson. This is just so that you guys can get a feel of how to add things and how the clay is going to be. Now, right now, I just kind of cut out a square because you're going to be getting a tile shape, whether it's a rectangle or it's a triangle. So I just wanted to show you what you're working with. You don't have to do that for yours. You remember, it's going to be split in half. But right now we're just going to work on the whole thing because this is just practice. There are a few ways that you can add designs to your artwork. You're going to get one of these scratch off tools, and you can carve out on the side using your extra pieces of clay to carve out an image that you want to add onto the top of your slab or the top of your tile. So right now I'm just carving out the shape of fire, kind of like I did for this example, and it's going to be an add-on, so it's going to stick out. It's going to be 3D. I'm going to carve out the piece and fix up the edges so they look nice and clean, and I would attach it. In order to attach this, I'm going to have to do a scratch and scoring method. So you would scratch the back of your attachment and also the back of your slab or your tile in order to let those clay particles really connect with each other and join together so it doesn't have a risk falling off later once it's dry. Again, this is just practice. You don't necessarily have to slip and score today while you're using Play-Doh, but that's how I made this one. I added on and put it on top. So now I'm just fixing it up. The second method would be to use the stick that you have and carve into this. You're also going to get some clay tools that you need to be extra careful with, but you could also carve your designs or create textures by poking your designs through, like I did on that example. So this makes a really cool texture. Remember, texture is the way that something feels, so as long as your hand can feel the texture, you're good to go. I'm going to smooth out the rough edges, and then we're going to pretend like, let's start over. Let's do something different instead of fire. If I wanted to make pebbles or rocks, I'm not scratching and scoring because it's just practice, but I'd roll little balls and add them to the back of my tile or the front of your tile. If you wanted to do a brick texture, you could carve in a brick design like I'm doing right now, or you could actually on the side build little bricks and then scratch and score them onto your tile. So it's really up to you how you want to decorate it. When you're done, roll up your Play-Doh and pick up all the pieces. Here's your example actually using the Crayola clay. So what you're going to get is a tile, you and your shoulder partner. One shoulder partner is going to get one side, and then you're going to get the other side. And you'll get to add your designs based on your element. You're also going to get a piece of clay to build your additives to, just like we watched yesterday when I was using Play-Doh, but this time I'm actually scratching and scoring using the clay tools that you'll be provided today and adding all of the things I'd like to do. Now, normally with regular clay, you would add some slip, which is like a mixture of your clay and water to make sure that it stayed, which would act like glue. But for this, we're just gonna scratch and score. So I'm going to show you a few different ways that I've made my examples. Like those coral looking things, I just made the little pebbles shapes and then used my stick to poke a hole through. And for the wider ones, I rolled out a sphere and poked my pinky through and then scratch and scored the back side and connected it. For your hand-built added pieces, there are also two ways you could do this. You could build every single piece, like if you wanted to make a flower, you could hand build every single petal, or you could carve out petals and then kind of like a cookie cutter, take them off of that and then add them. It's really up to you. For this example, I'm carving instead of adding onto. I'm carving out a design, and since we're working on like texture, I decided to create a tree and make the tree texture, and that's just squiggly lines, and I'm using one of my pen tools that's really sharp and pointy, so be extra careful with this. And I'm just going to go around and create a texture that goes all the way down. We want to fill in all of our blank space so that when we go to paint this, it'll look like our format is filled. Here is a close-up of that texture. I'm going to continue by adding grass texture by simply carving things in. So you can carve or you can build. It's up to you for your design. Just make sure to fill your format and take up the necessary space. After it dries, we're going to use our liquid watercolors to paint it, but I want to show you the shrinkage rate between the wet clay and the dry clay. So once it dries completely, it'll end up, and finished, it'll be a lot smaller. The next step is to paint our beautiful tiles, but we have to remember that you're going to get the colors that go along with the element you chose. You should have colored it on your example page, and then at the end we're going to Mod Podge it so that it makes that shiny gloss when your tiles are finished, and it'll seal it for us. We're going to work with this one, so my example versus what came out. All the colors that I wanted to use are in my palette for this entire thing. Washable liquid watercolors. The Blick brand is also says that it comes out of most fabrics. I like both of them. I got the metallics from Blick. Now I'm going to start by using the color palette that I started with. Now remember that adding this watercolor to your already dry clay is resaturating your clay, which means that it's going to start to be even more fragile than it already is. So try not to add too much liquid to it, and then also when you're handling it, to make sure you get all around the edges and all the really intricate pieces that you created. Make sure that you're extra careful. In order to make this easier, we're going to sit at our tables depending on which element you chose so that I can give you the right color palette. Right here I'm doing like water, so like ocean things, and this is the color palette you're going to get for that. Make sure that if you build something on the outside that you're extra careful about making sure you cover the entire 3D image and you're not missing any white pieces. It'll start to get matte because all of that clay, it's soaking up the liquid, and it'll turn and it'll look a little dry, but once we add the Mod Podge at the end, it'll make it glossy again. So now I'm working on the other tile, and this one was about earth, and I created a little sunflower. So I'm using a white Sax watercolor and getting all around. Now, I accidentally broke a piece of this when I Mod Podged it later, so just be really careful because it is very fragile, especially after adding the liquid watercolors on top. And make sure you fill in all your spaces. If you need some more paint, just raise your hand and I will come and refill your trays. It doesn't take much. I barely had any color and I ran out anyway. I have this antique metallic gold that we're going to use for brown. So if you did soil texture or anything that you need to be brown for earth, that is the color you're going to use for this. And make sure to get your edges. And the last step is to add the Mod Podge. So we're going to add it right after it dries. We're going to give it probably a minute to dry, but it doesn't take very long. And the Mod Podge is just going to be a thin layer on top covering your entire tile. It's going to look kind of like this little white sheen. When you're done, you should have this, it looks white, but it's going to dry clear and it's going to be shiny. So don't worry about the white. For the very last step, we're going to use this rubber cement, and we're going to put on our gold leaf. So inside the rubber cement, it actually comes with a brush, but we're going to use a tinier paintbrush to paint the very edges of our design. So I'm going to dip my paintbrush in that, and I'm going to paint the edges. Now you are going to have your own tile, and your shoulder partner is going to have their own tile, and you only have to paint the edge a little bit on top of the edge, kind of like this. So when I'm going to pull them apart so you can see, you do not have to do yours together. This was just me not realizing what I'm doing. So I'm going back and I'm painting that one on the edge. We're going to let it dry and use this gold leaf, these sheets of gold leaf. They come in a pack, and there's a few between every layer. So we're going to let it dry for about a minute or two, and we're just going to stamp it on there. And what's going to happen is that glue is going to pick up the pieces. So now we have gold leaf all over our edge. You can even do it on the side, the same side right here, the one that's right down the middle. And then you'll be done. And I'm going to show you a picture of both of them together. And if you put them close, it looks like they fit. This is going to bring in the Kintsugi part of our project, the gold that fixes the two pieces together. I also love the contrast in the two elements. So I can't wait to watch you guys make yours and see your finished pieces. Good luck!